Did you know that Alsace has changed its nationality 4 times in the last 100 years? It is ping-pong back and forth between Germany and France as the two countries have fought against each other in various wars over the last century. Now this is relevant because today in the Hand Drink Solar Wine Info video, we are discussing the Julien Schaal Cape South Coast Syrah, which is made by winemakers Julien and Sophie Schaal, who hail from Alsace. Julien and Sophie Schaal are a winemaking power couple who each have their own wine label in their homeland of Alsace. Julien has a range of Grand Cru single-site Rieslings, which are made distinct from one another based on the soil type of each vineyard block. By the way, these wines are available in South Africa and are well worth hunting down. Sophie, for her part, has her own range of wines called Sophie Schaal wines, and she works with Alsatian Pinot Noir, Pinot Gris, and Riesling. Now, Julien has been making wine in South Africa since the turn of the century, when, in about 2003, he came to South Africa to work as a cellar hand for Bouchard Finlayson in the Hummel and Arter Valley. As happens to many foreigners who come to visit South Africa, he fell in love with the place, and that is why today, at the end of each vintage in Alsace, he hops on a plane and comes across to South Africa in order to make a range of cool climate wines using fruit from Walker Bay and a few other regions. He uses the Paul Cluver Cellar in Elgin as his base of operations, and when he's done with all his work there, he hops on another plane back to Alsace in order to start the cycle all over again. Today's wine, the Cape South Coast Syrah, is a wine of origin Cape South Coast, which, as we've mentioned before, is a wine region so large that the designation is almost meaningless. But luckily for us, in this case, we have a little more information in order to try and make sense of the wine. All the fruit that went into this wine, in fact, came from one estate just outside Stanford along the Klein River. And you might say at this point, but then surely it could be designated wine of Walker Bay, which would carry far more clout when it comes to marketing power. But the truth of the matter is that the outer boundary line of the Walker Bay ward runs directly through the estate. And Julien sources fruit from 2 vineyards for this wine, one within the Walker Bay ward and one just outside it, even though they are neighboring vineyards. But for you wine sleuths who enjoy combing the wine labels for details in order to discover what glory lies within the bottle, you will no doubt have noticed that the alcohol level is 14.5%, which means that despite being a cooler climate Syrah, it still was made with fruit that was ripe enough in order to ultimately deliver a high alcohol wine. So at this point, it's probably worth noting that when South Africans talk about their cooler climate wines, we're not talking about crazy cold regions where the fruit is desperately struggling to reach a ripeness level high enough in order to be palatable, but rather we're talking about regions where ripening is slow enough and balanced enough to allow phenolic ripening and sugar ripening to occur at roughly the same time over a slightly longer period of time, while still maintaining high levels of natural acidity. So what does this delightfully slow ripening, cool climate Syrah taste like in the glass? Well, when we give it a sniff, we get a fascinating, almost schizophrenic set of aromas. On the one hand, you have delightfully ripe black fruit, fresh blackberries, maybe even some blackcurrant fruit pestils, and also some sweeter vanilla spice and allspice. Then on the other side, you have the moody elements of a black olive tapenade and a savory white pepper spice. And when we take a sip, well, the ripeness that was hinted at on the aromas really presents itself quite beautifully on the palate. You have these really well-defined fresh blackberry elements. You have the slightly sweeter blackcurrant pastel notes. And then, like that freaky Betty from The Ring emerging slowly from the well, you have those moodier notes of olive and white pepper and allspice coming up from beneath the fruit. Perhaps what I like most about this wine is that while the fruit is really full and well formed, it still allows the wine to be slender and live on the palate, as opposed to being a big, bolshy, fruit-forward Shiraz that you might expect from a warmer climate. Okay, so that's all we have time for today. But if you enjoyed the video, then support us on Patreon and sign up to the Hand Drink Solo Wine YouTube channel, where we publish at least 6 videos each month talking about wine history, wine science, unusual cultivars, and some of the rising winemaking stars coming out of the dynamic South African or Alsatian wine leagues.